Ready to go. Friends, let me begin. I think we're starting 5 minutes early because the Foreign Secretary has to leave a few minutes early, so that let's start the proceedings. So I want to begin by welcoming you all for this meeting on connecting Bay of Bengal and the prospects for regional cooperation. Delhi is far away from the seas, so generally the maritime issues don't get much attention. And that to Bay of Bengal, I think Delhi is oriented toward the west and Bay of Bengal doesn't get too much attention. So we're quite pleased to organize this in partnership with the India Development Foundation. And we are quite happy with the kind of overwhelming response that we've got for this topic, which I think, I believe, is going to be quite important in the coming years. Delighted to welcome Foreign Secretary Dr. Jaishankar and Ambassador Hiramatsu of Japan for this opening conversation for this conference. If you look back, I think Bay of Bengal became almost a backwater through the after the Second World War. But if you look before the World War II, I think it was the site of some of the major great power alignments, conflicts. We had a situation where India, Britain, United States working together to support China against the Japanese occupation at that point of time. Because India's own armed forces, one lot was fighting with Japan, one lot was fighting against Japan. So I think it's been historically a more complex environment than what we imagined in the last few years. It also was a bridge that connected different parts of South and Southeast Asia. But I think, again, because of the economic isolationism, we've seen the disconnection of this littoral over the last many decades. But today, our conference focuses on the imperatives for connecting Bay of Bengal and the prospects for improving regional security cooperation and regional economic cooperation in the Bay of Bengal littoral. So let me start this three-way conversation between Dr. Jaishankar and Ambassador Hiramatsu by asking the Foreign Secretary, why Bay of Bengal and why now? Why is the government of India interested in the Bay of Bengal at this point of time?
Well, look, I don't think I would completely agree that there's a sudden shift there. I think it's evolutionary. And in terms of evolutionary, one, if you see today more than half our trade actually is to the east of India, and not to the west of India. And that's a very big change which has been happening over 20 years. You made the point about Bay of Bengal being the backwaters and took us back to the Second World War period. I will actually take you back earlier. Our largest ports are probably historically the best ports were actually all in the east. And today, one of the interesting implications of the shift of trade towards the east is the revival of our eastern seaboard, including in your state, Andhra Pradesh. So I think when we say, look east, now we say act east, and I want to make a point of Bay of Bengal point there. There's actually a shift. There's a shift underway in the center of gravity of this country towards the east. And a lot of the globalization of India, the pull is actually towards the east, and the push is towards the east. Now, where does Bay of Bengal fit into this? 2 points here. One, when we say act east versus look east, it isn't just a semantic point or frankly even a PR point. I think a key difference is a sharper realization that there are two countries which are actually bridges or I would say corridors for the eastward pull for India, and these are actually Bangladesh and Myanmar. That unless our Bangladesh relationship goes right and the connectivity through Bangladesh, through Myanmar, if those don't work out, actually this idea of jumping over them and dealing with the ASEAN has very finite limits. Now, if we are going to therefore, I would actually argue in the last few years, among all our neighbors, probably these two countries are getting the attention that they deserve at last. And if that is the case, then Bay of Bengal acquires a salience which it did not have before. My second point would be this. See, in terms of, I think there's definitely a shift in India's own mindset towards more regionalism. People today are less reciprocal, much more open about what we can do, much more understanding of the fact that the neighbors need to be connected up to us. But if you look at the vehicle on which all of us had expectations, which is SARC, that vehicle has sort of jammed because of two big issues, the terrorism issue and the connectivity issue, where all countries are not on the same page. Well, specifically one country is not on the page as the others. So if we still want to do regionalism and SARC is not working, and here is Bay of Bengal, where actually today all regimes around the Bay of Bengal are broadly aligned. They all articulate similar priorities. And for us, Bay of Bengal is now a bridge towards raising the level of our game in Southeast Asia. I think you have a set of answers there.
There is the land corridor you talked about through Bangladesh and Myanmar. There is also the sea, where the other countries like Sri Lanka fit in. I mean, you also working on the sea side of it? I mean,
well, yes, again, if you look at Bay of Bengal, a lot of our efforts have gone into, to just give you some sort of specific building blocks. The idea of coastal shipping with Bangladesh, inland waterways with Bangladesh, discussing with them not just with them, with the Sri Lankans as well. The eastern seaboard of Sri Lanka today, Trincomalee in particular, I think has again an importance in this. So does the development of Andaman and Nicobar Islands for us. But there's another piece which is, and then Sitwe, the Kaladan project, and now
port.
We have to do the port is ready in Sitwe, but the road connectivity is, that will now, work has begun on that. So as Sitwe comes on stream, our own sort of connectivity relationships, because what's happening again with Bangladesh is a lot of the connectivity which was cut after 1965. I mean, if you ask me, give me a shorthand description of what you are doing on connectivity with Bangladesh, it would be we are restoring pre-65 connectivity with Bangladesh and raising the level. So if you look at the road, rail, power, inland waterway, coastal shipping, port development, power generation, that's what's changing the game with Bangladesh. And with Sri Lanka also, we have interest both in Colombo port and in Trincomalee port, and we have invested in rail and hoping to do in road in Sri Lanka. So the idea is really to kind of invest in that infrastructure around the Bay of Bengal while we build our own eastern seaboard, and that then kind of creates a completely different dynamic. And so that I give you the opening to shift to the ambassador. I think the important point there is now the entry of Japan, because if you ask me, in a sense, what has made this game different, I think there is a missing player till now. That missing player was Japan, because Japan invested very heavily in Southeast Asia and then kind of jumped South Asia and went to the Gulf and beyond. They had a footprint, but they had a very light footprint in South Asia. So I think the change with Japan has been the Japanese footprint, which was always there, has become much deeper. And if Japan comes in as a player, and Japan has very long-standing ties with Myanmar and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, I think you will see a very different dynamic.
Yeah. Ambassador, you, as we said, after the war, you focused on Southeast Asia and the Gulf because of the energy interdependence, largely neglected South Asia and the Bay of Bengal. But today, what is it that brings you to the Bay of Bengal? You're doing very interesting things in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in India, of course.
Yeah, our relationship goes back many years ago, and our relationship with regard to supporting infrastructure developments in countries like Myanmar, Bangladesh, Southeast Asia is very strong. So what we are doing now is how to have a more cooperation with these countries. Prime Minister had announced clearly that we should bring this idea of free and open Indo-Pacific strategies. We are trying to connect very vibrant and center of gravity of economic affairs in East Asia with African countries, which are again most vibrant place, promising area for future market. So how to connect these important areas? And India plays a very important role, the center of this entire corridor. So India and Japan can play an important role in developing many infrastructure projects. And the idea of look at East policy on the part of Prime Minister Modi really merged with the idea of open and free and open Indo-Pacific strategies. That's why, based on the very strong ties with ASEAN countries and Myanmar and also Bangladesh, we are trying to build up this and with the cooperation of India. And actually, we are talking a lot about what we can do with these countries for both port building and road bridge constructions. Not only maritime areas, but also land connectivity is important. We have started a discussion how to have a cooperation in Northeast region of India, and we have established Act East Forum in order that Japan and India can collaborate together to have more connectivity in the land, connecting northeast part of India with other countries like Myanmar, Bangladesh, and other Southeast countries. So we are serious in doing something very concrete. And one other thing I'd like to mention is that how to make sure that rule of law and norms will prevail in this region, especially in maritime domain. We are hopeful that openness and transparency, non-exclusive nature of infrastructure project, taking into account environment factors and financial health and safety and among other things, will prevail in this region. That things, the last meeting between two prime ministers, we came up a conclusion that these kinds of philosophy is a fundamental foundation for collaboration in all connectivity project between Japan and India. Not only two countries, but also other countries can share the same value. But that is important for us for having more durable kind of infrastructure in the future. Japan is promoting the quality infrastructure idea. That is the reason why we are doing that is this infrastructure should be durable, cost-effective, and open and transparent in the future. So that's the idea. I'm very happy to see that two countries can share this basic value. So this is foundation for future cooperation that will create more concrete project implemented together in this region. So Bay of Bengal is a new focus. That is area we have to have a renewed emphasis in our cooperation between two countries.
I think one of the things that has changed in the last few years, I think how we think about our geography. There was a time when India thought itself as a South Asian nation. There was the Indian Ocean concept. The Japanese, talked about East Asia, the Pacific. This merging of these two concepts, that there is something called the Indo-Pacific, which actually connects us. I think it was your Prime Minister who talked about the confluence of the two seas that's being now put across. For India too, I think the idea of Indo-Pacific as the larger domain in which we should be pursuing our economic and security interests. How do you see that? How did you see that come about? Is it a permanent change or is it a temporary concept?
Well, no, I think it's a permanent change, and I think it's a permanent change because one, it reflects larger globalization forces, and as I'm now speaking where we are concerned, if we trade more, and if suddenly countries
I left my iPad at the black cover in the other room.
Countries become much, your sense of distance and your sense of affinity, sense of distance is less, your affinities are stronger, your interests are broader. Again, I go back, look at what has happened with India's trade destinations and sourcing, and look at what an impact it's actually had on our understanding of the world east of India. And that's not going to change. Now, the second is, it's not just us who are changing. I mean, the world is also changing. Now, the old sense that somehow this is our region and, we are insecure with other players. Now, whether you are insecure or not, other players are going to come. So, we can't be in denial of that. Now, I think an intelligent nation then harnesses the changes and sees what works for you. So, to the extent we have countries whose broad goals are aligned with us, we are today very comfortable working with other countries, and Japan is one such example. So, see, from our point of view, I will be in East Asia and Pacific because my economic and consequently my security interests, and also if you look in terms of larger regional continental architecture, I can't, this very sharp definitions of South Asia, East Asia, I mean, these actually are definitions of the colonial era. I mean, India, if you look at Indian history was never confined between Kandahar and Myanmar. I mean, we've had a presence, a very broad presence, and in a sense, I think as the country grows, probably what is changing most is our own mindset. I think we are developing a broader vision which goes with a broader interest, and in that sense returning to a historical sort of role that we have played out here. And what we see is a lot of countries very, very comfortable with us, and we in turn need to develop that comfort with other countries. So, in fact, while you're focusing on Bay of Bengal, I would actually say the entire Indian Ocean region really should be a area where we should view it in a much more integrated way, and Bay of Bengal is a good place to begin.
Yeah. Ambassador, I mean, your concept, I think, as Abe, when he first came here, spoke to our parliament, he talked about the confluence of the two seas, which interestingly was a concept that was first articulated by Dara Sikoh, one of the Mughals, and he borrowed from there, and he's back, was back to power in 2012, and now we've seen that idea develop fairly vigorously in the last few years. Could you tell us what is driving this notion of Indo-Pacific, two continents, two seas strategy of Japan?
Thank you. Prime Minister announced this concept when he came to India 2007. He made a very powerful speech in Indian Parliament. That is foundation for his entire strategic ideas. He has special interest, special care about Indo-Japan relationship. The reason why is India has played a very important role, not only regionally but globally. How to connect two oceans and to make it a huge domain for peaceful and prosperous region. That is, I think, fundamental philosophy he has in his mind for many years. So it has been reinforced after meeting many times with Prime Minister Modi. They enjoyed very good and mutual trust, and that is fundamental founding stone for current good bilateral relationship. So he wants to do something more with regard to having concrete progress with regard to open, free Indo-Pacific strategies. That's why you have to do something concrete to create some concrete projects and to see that this idea is being shared by many other countries. As I said, we have a strong connection and a history of a relationship with Southeast Asian countries. We like to see more Southeastern countries engaged, for example, Indo-Pacific, in Indian Ocean. I hope, of course, more Indian Oceans basin countries will be involved in the issue of Pacific region. So this idea is how to connect, these two oceans. So after having a massive success in the last Sunday's elections, he is determined to press ahead with this idea with a banner of a proactive contribution to peace. So he will certainly play a more active role in promoting this idea and contributing peace and prosperity in this region, not by talking, but making some concrete results. So based on the discussion the Prime Minister had with Prime Minister Modi, we have already started how to materialize ideas they came up in that meeting, and that we will show the world that something is really happening with regard to a bilateral cooperation, especially in connectivity agenda. So I can tell you that Prime Minister has strong determination that he should press ahead this idea with a very strong cooperation between Japan and India, underpinned by strong personal friendship between two leaders.
I wanted to go back to one of the points that you mentioned earlier, that how regionalism becomes important for us only when we open up our economy. For long years after independence, we turned inwards, and so the disconnection with even the neighbors and the broader region of Indian Ocean and Asia took place. And the notion that, look, we'll act alone, a lone ranger when it came to economic development or of security in the larger region, that we'll do it ourselves, and not very welcoming of others coming in. You said that is beginning to change, that we're willing to partner other countries in achieving objectives that are our own. I mean, I think, is this idea that is emerging in the last few years, is it here to stay, or is it still a lot of hesitation in working with other partners, whether it's for security or for economic cooperation?
Well, I'd put it this way, that in the say pre-liberalization era, because we were a smaller economy and also with narrower interests and a more defensive posture vis-a-vis the world, we had kind of defined, I would say, core interests. Where core interests were concerned, as we showed on different occasions, we were willing to move, but there were narrower interests much closer to home. I think as we have become, as we have grown and our interests have grown and the world has become more connected, I think that old model is not going to work. The other is that, the other change is the sense that today a lot of what is going to determine political strategic influence are actually driven by economic and connectivity factors. So our own sense of what is power and influence has changed in the last 25-30 years. So to our mind today, if unless India takes the lead in promoting greater prosperity in South Asia, that's not going to happen. And we have to take the lead, not just because we are the largest, but also we are the fastest growing of the lot. So the demand and the driver is really, in a sense, in India. Now, the change would be, I give you two examples. Let's take the field of energy. Now, it's very clear that at some point, some of the hydel projects that we've been patiently trying to get through the Nepali system will happen. Now, it's in our interest that there are more and more transmission link-ups between Nepal and India going south. And if a country like US is willing to invest in power transmission in Nepal, linking Nepal to India, I think it serves both of us. Similarly, if I look south, now we are working with Japan on a project for LNG supplies in Sri Lanka. Again, Japan is the biggest global player in the LNG side, and we have both economic and strategic interest there. So it makes sense, instead of undercutting each other, if our interests are broadly aligned, that we work together, find some ability there. So it would, you will, it's not, by the way, having said that, I must say, it's not easy work. I mean, Indians do it their way and the Americans do it theirs and the Japanese do it theirs. So there will be issues of corporate culture, business culture, governmental culture, all those challenges will be there. But at the end of the day, I think if we, our neighbors are also sometimes more secure. Yeah. If there is another party in the room, and if part of it is regionalism will grow if there are higher comfort levels, then having the Japanese in the room or the Americans in the room is helpful for us.
So when Prime Minister Abe came here, one of the things that you agreed was on creating this Act East Forum. So is there some specific agenda that you're developing with India? So what is this forum going to do? How is it going to work? And are there any specific projects that Bay of Bengal could fit in?
We have to talk with Dr. Jaishankar on that.
We are the two co-chairs of the forum.
We are co-chairs of this forum. So you have to make sure that a good project will come out with this. The basic philosophy is how to connect this region to the wider region in the Southeast Asia. So the idea is good. We have a long-standing good relationship with northeast regions. So we like to make sure that something concrete will happen. We have already started some project with regard to road development and some deforestation project and some grassroots project already implemented in this area. So we like to make sure that what is priority areas for Indian government or state governments to which needs our assistance. We are very open-minded that we have already declared that this area is our focus area in India in our ODA project and other business-related activities. So let's see what will happen if we meet each other and to identify some of the areas for future cooperation. But we see a lot of potential for future cooperation in this particular area. And we, as I said, we have a special interest, long-term traditional ties with these states. So we have already started some preliminary dialogue, but let us see when we meet each other to identify something concrete. We are very much looking forward to having very fruitful and productive discussion, which will come out with some concrete projects.
May I just add? Let me explain to you why we are doing this forum. For us, Northeast development is a priority. We are also investing in connectivity to Myanmar and Bangladesh. Now, so are the Japanese. They have their Bangladesh projects, they have their Myanmar projects, and they are invested also in connectivity development in the Northeast. So the idea is, considering both of us are operating in the same space and our interests are self-supporting, then it's useful to have a forum where, if it's better we align, we coordinate and align, and we will get more value for our investments by doing that. So this is a very practical attempt at actually, when you say, okay, you have a great relationship, what are you doing? Instead of nice words, we are actually trying to take it down, drill it down to a sort of project level.
So if I might ask one question to both of you, that about the dragon in the room, shall we say, that the current discussions between India, Japan, or India and the US and Japan on this whole question of connectivity, many people see this as a competition with China's Belt and Road Initiative. Although if you look back, in fact, Abe's speech in 2007 was long before President Xi talked about Belt and Road Initiative. There was also the Japanese corridors that came up in India, in Mumbai, Delhi corridor and various other.
2005.
And the Japanese institution, what's it called, East Asia Research Institute, which had actually talked about connecting South and Southeast Asia. So the idea has been there for a while. And you also talked about, look, India can't build a great wall around South Asia. It can't keep other powers out. But at this point, you see the initiatives that Japan and India are doing, and the emphasis on, the rule-bound world. Is this as a pure competition with the Chinese, or is it going to create actually an environment in which everyone can abide by certain norms, certain transparency, certain accountability that you talked about in relation to the BR? Is that the long-term goal, where eventually we can all work together and it's not just about a raw geopolitical competition?
No, look, I don't think projecting it as competition with China is doing justice to ourselves.
Yes.
First of all, it's not doing justice to our history. If you look, this country has probably been in many ways the pioneer of connectivity. I'm not even talking Grand Trunk Road, which came much later, but even even the Silk Road. We probably have more ownership of the Silk Road than anybody else, even if we have somewhere lost the branding en route. But the point is that we have a certain view of how connectivity projects should come about. Okay, and it's not that we are so what we laid out earlier in the year was our viewpoint, and at that time there were concerns saying somehow we are getting isolated. I think clearly those were sentiments either of people who had less strong beliefs and convictions, or people who perhaps didn't fully understand how this connectivity business is unfolding. I think if you have seen the developments over the last few months, you can see that many of the concerns that we articulated in the summer have become broader international concerns. I mean, we hear this in Japan, we hear it in the US, we hear it in Europe. So, so in some ways, I think I would say it's important where we have a viewpoint and a conviction and a track record to speak up. We cannot always be a follower or a abstainer on the big international debates taking place in the world. And the example I would give you, I mean, if you look at what India itself has done in terms of connectivity abroad, I would say look at Situate Port, which we did as a grant. And we've done it as a grant, and we have told the Myanmaris, as soon as, we are willing to hand over the port to you, as soon as the road is done, then the inland waterway terminal is ready, it's yours, we are prepared to maintain it. Look at what messaging that sends. Now contrast it with models elsewhere. So I think we have really put our money where our mouth is on this and behaved as in line with the principles that we have advocated.
I have nothing to add because we are talking a lot about this issue. So we are very happy to have a convergence of views with regard to basic principles if you implement the connectivity projects. Just I'd like to refer to the joint statement by two Prime Ministers of Japan and India with regard to connectivity. It says that the connectivity of infrastructure is an open, transparent, and non-exclusive manner based on international standards and responsible debt financing practices while ensuring respect of sovereignty and territorial integrity, the value of law, and the environment. That's his idea. They like to be promoting, have been promoting for many years. This is a core of Prime Minister's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. So this is the same India's philosophy. So we have agreed on these basic principles. It is widely shared. If you look at a statement by Secretary Tillerson a week ago, the same thing has been mentioned. Even he talked about free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. Our philosophy has been mentioned in his speech. So the convergence of views among the main players on connectivity agenda is now becoming a reality. So I'm very happy to see that, and based on that, we will continue to have a more durable quality infrastructure developed in this region. So together with of course India and United States, other friends in this region, even beyond. Yeah. So we see a very positive development with regard to connectivity agenda in this region. So we have started this idea, and it's getting a reality now, thanks to the strong collaboration between Japan and India.
Just one last question before we take a few questions from the floor. I mean, briefly, that you talked about India being defensive in the past, and Japan has not been a normal power. Now it is talking about a normal power. India is talking about a leading power. You talked about it. So that as we step out of our shell for different reasons that we got into a shell, and today that as we look outwards with more self-assurance, is the India-Japan relationship, what we've seen happen in the last 2 years, is just the beginning of a beautiful relationship.
First of all, look, if we were more defensive in the past than we are now, part of it was a function of capability. Yeah. It was, if you look at our total comprehensive national power, we were perhaps not wrong in being defensive for part of it. The issue for Indian foreign policy is, as you grow, do your ambitions grow commensurately? Does your thinking expand commensurately? Does your sense of responsibility grow? So I just want to say, even when you say leading power, I'm not suggesting we are a leading power. I think we should aspire to be a leading power. So it is a kind of a
goal.
It's a goal, and the goal is partly a mindset goal, which is don't sit out the big issues of the day. Don't take necessarily the safest course. I mean, and some of the issues you brought up, like connectivity. I mean, I think it's good we spoke up on connectivity. I think we have the capability to influence global thinking on connectivity. And part of it is, my sense is our own behavior in the coming years, what we are doing in our neighborhood, what we are doing in Indian Ocean, will demonstrate a certain model of connectivity in the region. Now, in terms of where is India-Japan relations going, my sense is, as Japan actually, Japan is economically globalized, but in a security, strategic, political sense, that process is unfolding. So in some ways, it's a kind of mirror, the opposite of us. But as Japan's own perception of its interests becomes sharper, a sense that in many ways it will have to shoulder greater responsibilities, I think there is a very clear convergence there for everybody to see. The challenge for us is, you may agree intellectually, but the hard work is to actually make it happen on the ground, and that will require more meshing of different parts of the system, much deeper sort of economic relations, and that's happening. I mean, you can see Japanese investments have grown, Japanese infrastructure projects, supported infrastructure projects have grown. I think the bullet train, which is worthy of a separate debate, could probably have a very revolutionary impact on the technological situation of this country. So there are a lot of things happening there, but in every sense the graph is really pointing northwards.
But normal power, and where does India fit into the normal power?
Well, our hallmark strategy is proactive contribution to peace. And that is mentioned by Prime Minister. This is our national policy. It means that we will be more active in many strategic and security matters in the world. So we are happy to be more active in this region too. We have changed drastically our security policy 3 years ago. We are ready to support more actively in the conflict area too. So India is a big player in the world, and we are very happy to cooperate with India. And this is really a win-win situation. And if I talk about Japan-India relationship, you need another 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So I limit myself in saying that the security field is one of the areas we have to have a special focus. We have started some discussions with regard to transfer technology of defense cooperation. So we like to have something concrete. We entirely agree with what Dr. Jaishankar said with regard to something happened on the ground. And our relation should be more result-oriented. It's a time for discussing in a very vague manner is over. Now is the time for have a more concrete result out of a very strategic and fruitful, I think the best relationship between Japan and that particular stage. So I'm happy to upgrade this relationship to further stage. Thank you.
We don't have 30 minutes. We just got 7 minutes sharp. So Ambassador Goyal, I'm going to just take 3 questions, and we have to give some time to the 2 speakers because then the Foreign Secretary is going to leave sharp at 11:12.
Thank you. Since the time is very short, one very brief comment and one question. The comment is that I'm very glad to hear the Foreign Secretary mentioning the ownership of the Silk Route. And I agree completely that it's rather unfortunate that the branding has been completely misplaced. And the comment really is that perhaps it is time to look at Silk Route not just as a kind of a commercial or trade route, but the route for exchange of experiences and culture, which was much more predominant in the old times. The question is very briefly is, in this romantic Bollywood kind of story of India-Japan love, romance, as you mentioned, are there any villains there? Like in a Bollywood movie, without a villain, the movie is never complete.
Okay, yeah, they're friends from ICRC. Yeah, go ahead. Just if you stand up, the mic will come to you. Yeah.
Okay. Jeremy Nett from the International Committee of Red Cross. We are present in all the countries along the route of such infrastructure projects, and we follow it with great interest, obviously hoping for stability and prosperity of all concerned, and also better access for services and better disaster response for the populations along the line. But we're also conscious, because of our work in all those countries, of the instability in many of the areas where these projects go through. So we're wondering how the humanitarian dimensions are planned for in such regional infrastructure projects, and how we can help, or how humanitarian organizations can engage with those issues.
And the last question from Mrs. Anat Kaul.
Thank you. This seminar is about connecting the Bay of Bengal, India, Japan, and regional cooperation. Okay, so let's talk about Bay of Bengal and regional cooperation. As far as Bay of Bengal is concerned, all maritime agreements are in place. Whatever differences we had with Bangladesh, or Bangladesh had with Myanmar, have been sorted out through international arbitration. Now, connecting Bay of Bengal with what? South China Sea, I presume, and there's Malacca Straits, 900 kilometers or so. That's an area of turmoil, this is an area of peace. So we have a great advantage. Second
Question, yeah.
So now the second thing is that Japan, even Prime Minister Abe in 2007 had mentioned that Andaman and Nicobar Islands are a great asset. Japan had them during the Second World War for 3.5 years, they know about it. And from strategic point of view and from, I think, economic point of view, they have a great value. We would like to have some comments from both the Foreign Secretary and the Ambassador about what they think of how to handle both the strategic and this thing and the economic growth.
Yeah, I think I got it. Yeah. Jitu Mishra, just very briefly, and then we're going to go back to
Question for the Foreign Secretary. How does the Rohingya crisis impact India's connectivity projects in the region, particularly in Myanmar?
Thanks. Ambassador, you would like to go first?
Question for me?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. I mean, your last word, Foreign Secretary is going to leave after this.
I think let me start with what Suresh raised. Look, my own sense is India-Japan relations have a value for both countries, obviously, but they have a larger value for Asia because it is actually this fracturing of Asia which has kept Asia backwards. Now, the more options that Asia has, the more consultation there is in terms of reconnectivity in Asia. Probably it is best for everybody. So I think it's important that India-Japan relations not be defined in negative terms, that somehow every movie doesn't require a villain. There can be some where there is actually true affection for the sake of affection. And trust me on this one. So I think part of the concern I have is that sometimes we get into this overly competitive narratives that then take away the practical significance of what we are doing. I think there is Asia is so underconnected, and South Asia most of all, that any connectivity which comes in, you say any road you build, any power you give is good for this place, provided it follows broad principles, it's sustainable, it's it's respectful of local sensitivity. So that's a connectivity vision that we've laid out. On the humanitarian, and in fact I would go beyond even HADR. One of the areas which we would like to see on the agenda of BIMSTEC is actually collaboration on the HADR side. That we would like these countries to start working together on humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. And I think particularly in the last 3 years, you would notice from the Nepal earthquake or the Yemen civil war or the Sri Lankan mudslide or the Maldives water crisis, or even this operation we did, Operation Insaniyat, for the displaced persons who came out of the Rakhine state, that we've been very active in pushing that. We certainly think this is part of regional, as an important part of regional cooperation. I'll just jump from there to Ambassador Mishra's question, Rohingya issue. Now, look, the fact that there is a exodus of large number of people from Rakhine state to Bangladesh is clearly, a matter of concern. I think we have sort of expressed that very clearly. Our objective would be to see how they can go back to their place of origin. Now, clearly that's not easy. I mean, we are talking to Bangladesh, we are separately engaged with Myanmar. There have been high-level conversations with both countries. And we feel that this is a situation which is better addressed through practical and measures and constructive conversations rather than, doing very strong condemnations and then having checked the condemnation box, moved on to the next issue. So we actually feel this is one where we need a much more sober, realistic, sort of locally sensitive approach than we have seen in some quarters. On the Bay of Bengal and Andamans, I think the value of the Andamans and Nicobars for the development of Bay of Bengal is quite apparent. We have approached it I'm talking now of Government of India, largely as a developmental issue. Obviously there are security aspects to it as well. My understanding, I'm not the person dealing with it in the government, but my understanding is this is very much a focus area for development of the Bay of Bengal region. I think I've covered that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Foreign Secretary. Thank you, Ambassador Hiramatsu. Thank you for all of you for being here this morning. So the Foreign Secretary has to leave now, so I'm not going to say very much after this. So please join me in thanking our two speakers for this morning. So we have a short break and then we start at 11:30, right?